The tragic story of Budweiser's family mansion began with a grand house, meant to show success and prosperity, but it ended with the family inside the house falling apart. Broken marriages, money feuds, and deaths that no wealth could fix. The family who built that house made their fortune from a simple but sellable product: beer. They were immigrants and inventors, brewers who learned to turn grain, water, and yeast into an American brand that crossed town lines and then state lines. Their name became a synonym for a cold and refreshing comfort that came after a long day. With that name came horses and hops and public parades of prosperity. The mansion was a private counterweight to everything they sold on labels, a place where the wealth could sit down and be admired in private. It was a house that was meant to be seen. The owner wanted rooms that would hold the city's movers and shakers, a drawing room with tall windows that caught the river light, and a dining hall long enough for 100 to dine without feeling crowded. There were stained glass panels that let colored rectangles fall across rugs in the afternoon, carved mantels that remembered every winter, and ceilings painted with symbols that no one could read anymore. The family's pride in their Clydesdales was part advertising, part affection. They kept a carriage and matched teams. These expensive horses were like their living logos for a company that loved to show off. There were private things too, like a daughter's sitting room with an embroidered chair, a father's private study with brass fixtures, a safe whose door closed like the ones you see in the banks. But wealth makes rooms and artwork requires an audience. Behind the polite hosting, disputes brewed that money couldn't resolve. Marriages in the family frayed. A son who'd been raised in the dining chairs found himself more often in the private rooms, moving like a man who no longer recognized the faces who watched him. A daughter who married into good standing left with the kind of silence that comes when conversations are deliberately avoided. Scandals started, some private and some that everyone around them knew. With time, the scandal started leaving marks that no amount of fancy and expensive wallpaper could hide. The mansion, which had been built to hold company, began to hold secrets. The tragedies were small at first, but slowly but surely they started piling up. It started with a business partner's death that left paperwork scattered like dry leaves, a cousin's illness that emptied one wing for months, and a fire in a service room that was patched and then quietly forgotten. Then came events that couldn't be neatly covered up. Some deaths looked ordinary in police reports but were devastating in family albums. A note found in a late-night room, an abrupt end to a life that had once been loud and promising. People pointed to different causes. Was it pressure, expectation, or a habit that had not been treated? Regardless of the questions asked, the results were the same. The laughter in the house was disappearing. Publicly, the family's name remained a brand. The beer truck still rolled, and the advertisement still promised better living through their product. But privately, the family found itself in the rarer, corrosive state of wealthy people who had nowhere to fall. Lawsuits came, and boardroom battles felt less like governance and more like a public airing of wounds. Newspapers printed police notices and then headlines about resignations and sales. As the decades turned and caretakers changed, the first housekeepers who had known each family member's habits by heart were replaced by staff who knew only instructions. The rooms that had once held balls and banquets began to be used less for gatherings and more for storage. A ballroom became a meeting place for contractors. As all of this was happening, the family decided that it was time to get out. The mansion that was once a symbol of success became a place filled with bad memories. People imagined ghosts in these empty rooms, and the mansion seemingly decided to play along. Doors opened by themselves late at night. That's what the neighbors said, but more likely it was the wind that slipped through bad seals. Children started to dare one another to touch the faded wallpaper and run back. It was a sad story. The house's best furniture was sold at auction, and some visitors were allowed in on rare, carefully filmed tours. Some of the more sentimental pieces were taken to museums where glass cases could better preserve them than a mid-20th century heating system ever could. The family's public identity shifted too. A corporation rearranged holdings. Names that once loomed in headlines were confined to historical notes. Pieces of the estate were parceled off, and what remained was often fought over. There were offers for the property that seemed sensible on paper, conversions into apartments, a university annex, a hotel that would promise to keep the spirit alive while charging guests. Each plan read like an attempt to rewrite the end of a story that felt, to many, improper to alter. But no plan truly replaced what had been lost. The man who famously introduced the iconic Budweiser Clydesdales to celebrate the end of Prohibition in 1933. August Anheuser-Busch Sr. had ended his own life with a revolver just a year later, leaving behind not only chaos, but also a letter that just read, "Goodbye, precious mommy and adorable children." The mansion that was a display of the success of the man who stood behind the largest brewing company in America grew silent. That was the reason people started slowly moving out, leaving emptiness to echo and the dust to settle. Even as time took its toll, the mansion kept offering reminders of what had once animated it. A stamped brass plate at the pantry door still read the name of a cook who had taught grandchildren when to salt, and a small child's crayon drawing tucked behind a panel remained as if waiting for retrieval. Sometimes, on clear evenings, locals reported seeing a carriage's shadow in the dusty pane of the garage window. But was it imagination or light catching at just the right angle? No one knew, but it seemed as if the house rewarded attention by becoming a place of many stories in Afton, St. Louis County, Missouri. The final irony of all such houses is how quickly the public moves on. A generation that remembers the family mansion as full and visible was gone. And the newer residents do know the name on the sign only as a brand and not as a family. For those who remain, the mansion becomes a lesson in the limits of power, a physical argument that inheritance is not only a transmission of wealth but also of vulnerability. The house stood as a translation of that idea, carved stone for business, quiet rooms for human failure. Walking away from the gate now, you could tell the story in a single image. A window lit briefly at twilight, a sliver of warm light that made the old grass glow like a human eye. Beneath the light, a staircase rose and vanished. The house, like families, contains more than one ending. It contains beginnings, too, and the memory that even the most suited room once held someone who laughed, loved, and was lost. That is the tragic thing. Not that the house fell into disrepair, but that its true riches were never measurable by the stone, but by the simple, irrecoverable moments lived within them. If you stand there long enough, the frost will melt, and the house will absorb the day. It'll be ready again to keep secrets, to hold a party, or to be a blank stage for someone else's life. That's the stubborn hope of old mansions. They persist because human stories insist on continuing, messy and unscripted. The mansion will be repurposed, razed, or lovingly restored. Either way, its story will become another layer under newer roofs. For now, the rooms remain silent. But who knows? Maybe one of those ideas to use Anheuser-Busch's mansion will come to fruition. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this one.